Okay, hello. Hope everybody's doing well in TV land. Last time we were talking about the tools. Get the website up. So last time I had ranted about physical tools for a while, and I talked about some text editors for a while. This time I'm going to kind of continue that and finish that stuff out. I believe Sprint 3 ends today, and thus Sprint 4 is supposed to start. I don't have this document published right now, but I will publish it this afternoon. There's no severe surprise there, so you probably know about what to expect from Sprint 3. I think it asks you to remember what Sprint 4's extra is, but I'll publish that later, and we can talk about it a little bit next time. It's not a huge deal. So my plan for today is to kind of finish talking about a few things in here. We left off talking about text editors and IDEs a little bit, and I wanted to actually talk about Vim for a little while. Just because it's kind of a particularly important thing that is probably going to come up in your career at some point or another, and it's really worth you taking a few moments and understanding it. It may not be the kind of thing that you actually need to use often. Like, if you work in all Microsoft products, you may never come across it. But increasingly, servers are running Linux, and when you are remoted into a Linux machine, you generally have a terminal and you need to edit files. So I'll talk about Vim just a little bit. Basically, I'll give you a quickie crash course in it. Then I want to discuss some language tools and maybe the Joel test, because I think it's a useful thing to talk about too. So that's kind of my agenda for today. So without further ado, let's do that. So Vim. Let's start with Vim. Vim is a useful editor. There are many variants of the editor. The original editor was called VI. Vim is kind of the standard replacement to VI. It's actually kind of hard to find an actual implementation of VI running anywhere. Most implementations where you run the command VI, you are running Vim or NVim or one of the other variants of Vim. I personally use a thing called NVim. It's called NeoVim. It's a newer kind of alternative. But Vim itself is nice because pretty much it's a very small text editor as far as installed space goes. And so you can mostly expect it to exist on any Unix-like machine that you happen to access. So if you have a Mac, you already have Vim. If you're running a Linux VM somewhere, you have Vim. If you remote into like a cloud server that's running Linux, you have Vim. And that's why I think it's a really important thing to cover, is that it's kind of ubiquitous and it's kind of the standard, just available text editor when you're working in a terminal. Now, you don't have to use Vim in a terminal. There are many other ways to use it. Every text editor for programming that I use a Vim emulation mode, so I at least have the same commands because I'm very used to it. And there are GUIs for it as well. They're not super helpful, but they do exist. So, to learn Vim, a couple of things. I'm going to run you through editing really simple files and a couple of like the core mechanics of how Vim works. I have a couple links here to some other tutorials that are great to check out as well. But I think that it's, like I said, it's worth giving some minutes to and kind of evaluating. So the first thing that happens is we grab ourselves a terminal because that's its natural habitat. And if you're not comfortable in a terminal yet, that's okay, but I do suggest that you get comfortable in a terminal. I'm going to zoom in here. The terminal is really, really great because everything that you want to do on a computer, you can pretty much do here. And especially in the Unix philosophy, it's really great because it is the interface, which means that we can control the entire computer from just one application, the terminal. It's also really useful because it is simple. There are no graphics involved, so we can remote to other machines and use the terminal as though we were on that computer, right? So right now I'm on my personal computer, but if I SSH to another machine, same environment already set up. So learning how to navigate the terminal is, one thing. I'm going to find some files to edit here. I'll edit our course files. So terminal usage aside, that is an important topic, and I'll show you some pointers on how to get going there. But essentially, if we want to use Vim, we are going to have to enter Vim. Now, I'm going to run this two ways, all right? So to enter Vim, we have VI, and we can give it a file name. So all of our course stuff is in this C346.toml file, which is a configuration format. So usually, if you wanted to enter Vim, this is the command that you would use with whatever file you're trying to edit. That said, I'm not going to do that because I use this Dvorak keyboard thing that I talked about last time, and I want to make sure that I'm going to use a special configuration file so that the keystrokes that you see in the bottom right here, the keystrokes that you see, I got to get used to that opposite thing, are going to match what you might type on a normal Vim installation that's not my souped up version. All right? This is still my souped up Vim RC, but hello? Oh, that did not work well. Okay, hang on. Why didn't that work well? I think I know why. I'm going to do something, and don't worry about what I'm doing right now. I thought I already launched. Thanks. Huh. Okay, well, I'll tell you what we're going to do. I will launch it with no configuration so that we're on, again, this is going to be standard Vim commands. Okay. So this is what a vanilla version of Vim looks like when you start it, not my souped up version. At some point, I'm going to switch over to my version so that we can see some nice things that it does. Vim is much like those other text editors I was talking about. It's a Swiss Army knife and is very extendable. So people install all kinds of plugins and the like for it to extend its functionality and make it look better, all that kind of stuff. So when you start Vim, this is different than you're probably used to if you haven't ever used it before. Vim is what's called a modal text editor. And what that means is there are different modes that you use the program in. So when we start Vim, the joke that new programmers or new users have is that they don't know how to get out, because it just shows you this file and you have to know the commands to use it, right? So it's not going to help you out at all. You just have to know some commands, and it doesn't take that many, right? This isn't actually super hard. It's just you need to know a couple of things to get into it, and then you can expand and learn more stuff. And fair warning, I've been using this thing since literally before the turn of the century. So don't feel bad if you're not like fast and memorized 1,000 different commands. Like, that's okay. You start slow. Okay, so modal text editor. Vim has a few different modes. The main ones that you have to worry about are called normal mode, insert mode, EX mode, or command mode. Those are really the most important that you have to worry about. There are a couple of more. There's like selection mode and a couple of other things. But essentially, when you start Vim, you start in what's called normal mode. Now, normal mode is not really text editing, right? Normal mode is this mode where you can enter commands. So the commands that I can enter are things like navigation commands, right? So to navigate in Vim, you use the home row keys. You use H, J, K, and L. Your arrow keys actually do work as well, but H, J, K, L is the way you do this. And so J and K, J goes down. See, I just pressed J 4 times and I went down. If I press K 4 times, I go up. H and L move side to side. So L moves to the right. There's 4 to the right. And H moves to the left. 4 to the left. Here we go. So you see, that's kind of the movement commands. And with that, you can probably already start navigating a file, right? And get to a place where you want to edit. So there is mouse support and scroll support and all that stuff, but the idea is to keep your hands on the keyboard so that you're working and being able to type and edit the file fast. Although you don't have mouse support necessarily if you're like remoted into a machine that doesn't support it. Okay. So those are navigation commands. And a lot of what you do in normal mode is navigation. There are a few commands that get us into insert mode. So depending on where you want to insert text, we can insert or append text. Lowercase I, if I press lowercase I am now in, you see at the bottom here, I don't have a mouse. You see at the bottom here, it says insert. That's because I'm in insert mode now, which means that anything I type now shows up in the text file. So if I write, I don't know, Mr. Chris Sexton, right? If I want to get out of insert mode, generally speaking, you try to stay in normal mode as much as you can. So I entered insert mode, escape. And that symbol in my keycaster there with the circle and the arrow is the symbol for escape on Mac. Escape gets me out of insert mode and back into normal mode, right? So there are some more. So notice where my cursor goes. So my cursor is right between Mr. and Chris Sexton there. If I press I, my cursor goes to the left of that. It inserts before that, right? But there is also a command to get into insert mode, A, which is append. Lowercase a goes after, oops, sorry, I bumped the mic. I don't know if that came through. The text, right? So this would be if I wanted to insert after my line. Now, 2 more. These are easy. Capital I and capital A do similar things, except for they go further. So capital I inserts at the beginning of the line. You see that? I'm at the beginning of the line there. I'm going to undo that. Capital A appends to the end of the line. So those commands, I and A, capital I and capital A, let you get into insert mode to edit text. And while you're in insert mode, backspace works fine, delete works fine. It acts mostly like a regular text editor does. So if you wanted to use Vim as though you don't know anything about it, you could start it up, press I, use it like a regular text editor, and when you're done, press escape so that we can get out of it, right? One more useful thing, X and D. So X, I'm going to go to the beginning of my last name and I'm going to press X. It removes characters. So you see I just removed my name by pressing X multiple times. I'm going to undo that. I undid the whole line apparently. And D deletes a line. So if you press D twice, I removed that line of text. Those are how you get rid of text without having to go into insert mode and hold a button or something like that. I don't hold buttons, I get rid of text quickly, right? We haven't shown any superpowers yet, so if it seems kind of dumb so far, don't worry about it. It gets better. We have to crawl before we run. Okay, so that's enough information for you to use insert mode and kind of add and remove text. That's all the information you would need. The last mode that you have to know about is the command. So if I press colon, you see down at the bottom, I just got my cursor moved to the bottom of the screen, and here I can type commands for the editor. And oftentimes the command is W and or Q. So W writes a file, so that saves. So if I press colon W and enter, I just wrote the file, I just saved the updated version of it. If I press colon Q and press enter, I will exit the text editor. Right, so here we go. We're gone. Right, now I'm going to go back in. I can also type colon WQ and save and quit all in one go. So in the case, let's just say that you were doing some Git work. Look at this. I have all these things modified. Actually, let me... There we go. So let's say that I have some changes to a repository that I've made. I'm going to make some changes to this repository. And I want to make a multi-line commit. My computer is working super hard right now, so all these commands are going to take a second. I actually just started it up a few minutes ago, so it's probably working. Okay, so if I do a git status right now, I have some changes. And if I git add -u, so I add all those changed files. If I do a git commit without a -m, one of the things that I've been trying to steer you around all semester when I taught you Git was that if you include a -m, you can put your message here so that you don't get put into Vim. Well, let's go in Vim. So we just launched the default editor, which is Vim, and we're now editing our commit message. If I want to have a multi-line commit message, this is how I do it. But I'm in Vim, so right now I'm in normal mode, you see that. Currently I'm in my fancy configured version of Vim, so you see I have some stuff going on. I don't have the right font set on this terminal. Give me a second, I'm going to make it look better. Can't believe this. Why isn't my good font set? There we go. Yeah, I have those nice little arrows and stuff. All right. So I'm going to add my commit message. So I might append here. So I'm in insert mode now. And I'll write something like A short message is always the first line of a git commit. So update build files. And then following that, we can write whatever we want. So I might write a list, like, change the due date. And I might write, did a thing. And I might write, another thing. And I can make this text as much as I want. And in a professional setting, which is to say, not necessarily what you guys are doing on your projects, but like when you have a job, it's generally expected that your commit messages are not one line did gobbledygook or one line that says commit. That's not okay professionally, right? Professionally, you want to have a short thing that says what you affected, a summary, and a longer message that says probably why you did it and maybe what specifically you touched, so that somebody else coming back in time, let's just say you quit, a year down the line somebody says, I don't know why this line of code is this way, and they look at the commit that caused that line of code, they can look and see an actual piece of information about what was going on, why you did it, maybe a reference to a trouble ticket, that kind of stuff. And indeed, in GitHub, we can reference, if you put something like ref number and the number of a ticket, or the number of a, I think you have to convert project cards to issues to get them to do this, but you can reference issues, you can reference pull requests this way. And in fact, you can write fixes number and closes number as well, and GitHub will automatically close it. So I pressed escape. I'm done writing my commit message. I press WQ, and Git will take that file and finish the commit. Right? Now I have a problem. I've just committed something I don't really want. If I do a git, we're going to do some advanced git. If I do a git rebase -I can edit all of the commits since the last push. In fact, if I quit this, actually, if I do head, I think I have to do this in quotes, head tilde, I don't know, 5, that'll be the last 5 commits. So here are the last 5 commits. And here, this is that commit I just made. If I replace it with the letter, see down here we have commands. I want to drop that commit. So if I put D or drop there, I'll get rid of it. It's gone. So we can edit git history, and you do that using Vim. You do it using a file that you edit, and then Vim looks at the file and does what you say you wanted to do. So I hope that's at least the ability to actually interact with the command line and the tools. Vim is kind of indispensable. A lot of times people will tell newcomers, oh, just use Pico or Nano, which are acceptable for very short tasks. I'm not even going to dignify those by showing them off. But Vim is really what you want. Right? So Vim is a full-featured text editor for all kinds of uses. And I'm going to show us my Vim config now. So I'm not trying to show you how to run commands anymore, because I have my own commands. My key bindings are different than yours. But just to illustrate what a featured Vim installation looks like. So I have some code right here that I wrote that manages my plugin system. So Vim has some plugin systems that people have written. And what follows, these are all of the extensions that I have installed in my Vim config. You see, I have kind of a lot of them. Yeah, I've been curating this Vim config for a long time, right? And there are some great things in here. I'll mention a few of them. I'm not going to go through all of them. But Super Tab is really good tab completion for writing code, make you have IDE-like features. Vim Go is Go language support. Nerd tree is really good. Vim has a limited file browser built in, but my nerd tree gives me a file browser at the right-hand side so that we can look through, find a specific file we want to edit. So I could go into, I don't know, my source directory and find some code that I want to edit. Here's the 346 directory, testing123, main.go. There we go. We have the main file open, right? So nerd tree, pretty good. There are a bunch of tree controls. That just happens to be the one I've been using. What else is really cool in here? Vim Airline is what's giving me this status bar at the bottom that looks neat. Vim Fuzzy Finder is nice. That's finding files fast. So is Control P. Looks like I have Rust support in here. Black is for Python support. So you can kind of get the idea that there are all kinds of little things that we add and remove and change and that kind of stuff. Ale is pretty nice. It gives you syntax verification. So if there's a problem, to the left of the numbers, the line numbers, it'll insert like a little X or an exclamation point if something's wrong with a line of code. So then we have other things. So after the plugins, we have kind of general settings, behavior settings. This, or a very similar Vim config is on the website. And the one thing I want to caution you about is if you want to try Vim and if you want to use my config or start with my config, be a little bit careful. These lines right here, 113 to 128, change the default configuration from HJKL to Dvorak compatible, which is DHTN, and we have to remap a couple of other keys because of what that gets rid of. So for instance, DHTN, if I'm using D instead of H, because that's where my D key is, or my H key, one of those, DHTN means that I have co-opted the key that usually deletes a line of code, and that means that I have to find a different place for that. I use the J key because it's not being used anymore. So if you take this file, I'm just saying out loud, and oftentimes somebody will ask for it and use it, make sure you get rid of those lines. There are a couple of things I'm really used to. I like to navigate by jumping 20 lines at a time, so I made the capital versions of my up and down arrows, which for me is H and T, for you it would be J and K. I made them just repeat the up or down action 20 times. So if I press capital T, I move up 20 lines. If I press capital H, I move back down 20 lines. Those are the kinds of things you can customize the crap out of this thing. The Vim configuration language here is a full programming language, so you can do all kinds of stuff, right? After that, and this is just for your edification again in case you decide you want to look through this thing, I have sections for each of the plugins that need configuration. So like Control P has some configurations that I want to set so that I ignore certain things. The syntax highlighter, I wanted to set these nice Unicode X and exclamation for problems it finds, that kind of stuff. JavaScript options, Go options, nerd tree options. The list kind of goes on, and this is kind of tailored to my experience using Vim. Some of it is probably not even being used anymore, but that's how I kind of work, right? So a lot of this stuff that I'm saying here is beyond the kind of simple usage, but I want to show you kind of where you end up going if you dive down this rabbit hole. Getting simple usage, being able to launch the editor, insert text, and save and quit is, I would consider, a core necessary thing that you need to know how to do if you're going to use any Unix system, if you're going to work on cloud computing, that kind of stuff, you need to be able to use the editor because, again, it's the editor that is available everywhere. So that's kind of my introduction to Vim in half an hour. I'm going to show you a couple of things on the web here. So I have 2 links to Vim tutorials, and they're pretty good. The first one is pretty cute. It's a little RPG that you can play if it loads. Whoa, what happened there? There we go. So this is a little RPG that you can play in your web browser, and it uses the Vim navigation. I don't know if you guys can hear its music or not. It uses Vim navigation, and you play this little game. So HJKL, it's giving you right there, lets you follow this path. And you can kind of navigate through, and they instruct you how to use Vim as you try to beat this game. So it's cute, it's fun. I think level 1 is free, but after level 1, it is a paid product. So 13 levels, 25 bucks. Honestly, if you want to learn Vim, 25 bucks for a cute little tutorial isn't super bad. I don't think that's too bad. It's a cute little thing, and they've done a bunch of work on it. It's pretty fantastic. The other one I'll show you is this one, and this is kind of older and is free. But it gives you this little keyboard, and it kind of runs you through how to use Vim. There is also an inbuilt version of this. I don't think this one... So it wants to introduce me to Vim. You press enter, and it starts telling you about it. So insert mode, normal mode, just like I was telling you about. And it kind of gives you information about how to use the editor in this little emulated version in the web browser. Another free option, though, inside of Vim, there is a Vim tutor. So if you enter Vim and you press colon, I'm forgetting how you do this. I haven't done it for a while. Help tutor, maybe? Yeah, using the Vim tutor. So colon tutor. Okay. So if you enter Vim, you press colon and capital tutor. It enters kind of a lesson, and you can learn Vim from right within Vim. Which is great because it'll teach you all about how to use it, and kind of give you more and more little bits as you go and bobs. So there are 3 different ways that you can learn this magnificent text editor. I think that if you decide to dive into it, you will quickly find that it is actually pretty intuitive, but you have to know a few things first, like get a cheat sheet or whatever. All right. So lastly here, apparently I'm not running my scroll behavior thing. I'm getting sent everywhere. Right here, Chris's vimrc, I have a version of that Vim file available for you to download. So if you want to see my configuration, if you're curious, whatever, it's there. Like I said, I've curated that for a long time. I don't spend a lot of time on it anymore, so things get kind of slap added and removed. But give you some ideas about what you can do. All right, so that kind of buttons up my text editor talk. And again, just to recap, I think that this is extremely important because you are currently going to school literally to edit text professionally for the rest of your life. The way that you edit that text matters, and becoming efficient with that matters, right? One other thing I'd say about Vim, both the JetBrains products and the VS Code Vim plugin have the ability to read your .vimrc file. They can't run plugins, but if you have navigation commands set or any of that kind of stuff, they are very competent plugins at respecting your Vim configuration so that you have kind of the same editing everywhere. I super like it. All right, so let's talk a little bit about some other tools that you need to be aware of and know other than your editor and your OS. As far as coding goes, there are a lot of things that kind of go around what you're doing. One of those is a linter, and if you've been using an IDE to edit Java or something, you've probably been paying attention to a linter anyway. Linters can warn you when you have what I'm going to call non-idiomatic code, which is to say code that isn't kind of the way that it's supposed to be. I have three here highlighted. Pt.2 is the linter for Python. You may or may not know this, but Python has Python enhancement proposals, PEPs, and they're numbered. The 8th such of those, which was a very long time ago, is style conventions. Right? So a long, long time ago, Pt.2 was created, and it's the style guide for writing Python. It is easy to write Python that is not within style. It's valid Python, but it might do things that are either dangerous, confusing, or just ugly. And so what Pt.2 tries to do is make it so that if we all follow the same style guideline, anybody can read your code. That's a good thing, right? So it specifies, and it is picky, mind you, but it specifies all kinds of things, like what kind of indentation do you use, tabs or spaces. Python specifies spaces, and that's a thing I don't really like. I believe that the big dog up north or up top put the tab key on the keyboard for a reason, so that you could insert a tab character. I don't like replacing it with spaces. I like being able to set my editor and tell it how big I think a tab is, how wide I think a tab is, so I can control what my files look like. If you use spaces, that's not reasonable. But Python says use spaces, and that's part of this Pt.2. So the Pt.2 tool, so this PyPy thing here is the Pt.2 tool, it checks that you are matching that style guideline, right? So if I were to run Pt.2 on a Python file, it will print out all of the errors and warnings that you have. And it'll warn for things like multiple imports on a line, when it expects blank space, what kind of white space you're using, but it'll also warn you when you use deprecated features. When you use a library function that's going to go away in the next version of Python, that's a good thing to know about, and the Pt.2 tool will tell you. So this thing, especially if you start with code that you've already written, can be a little bit of a bear, and some things people choose to ignore. That's generally okay. But I highly recommend making sure that your editor is making use of it. Now, how do you do that? Well, in Vim, I have that black plugin installed that runs Pt.2 on my behalf. I think it actually runs something else that's wraps Pt.2 on my behalf. In VS Code, search the marketplace for Pt.2 or for a Python support plugin, and you'll find some that will do this checking for you, style checking for you. If you're using PyCharm, I think it's built in, and it'll just warn you about Pt.2 issues. But take those warnings seriously. When you see yellow underlines in a text editor, warnings are generally there for a reason. They're not there to be ignored. It's convenient to ignore them, I understand, but they're not a good idea to ignore. They can bite you. So similar to Pt.2, I linked JS Hint. Now, JS Hint I think is not necessarily the one everybody uses anymore. I think they use ESLint these days. But JS Hint will do fine for this version. That is really small. Let's see if I... I'll press plus a little bit there. So JavaScript. JavaScript is a terrible language if you're not aware. Knowing what languages are good for what is a useful thing also. Do that. But in JavaScript, there are various things that can get you in a lot of trouble. One of them is, for instance, leaving off semicolons in various places. So if I do something like for I in A, and I'm not actually going to define A yet. Console.log A. Now, we cannot see these because I've made the font so big. So I'm going to put it back small, sorry. What we see over here are warnings. Missing semicolons are warnings. Because JavaScript does this thing called semicolon insertion. Hey, hang on. And what semicolon insertion means is that in various kind of unreasonably obnoxious places, JavaScript will end a statement. And it's not always where you expect. It's usually where you expect. So you can get away with leaving semicolons out in a lot of places, but it's not always where you expect, right? So adding those semicolons back in gets rid of some warnings, and we want to. You want to be very strict about the way you write JavaScript, even though JavaScript is not strict about the way you write JavaScript. Because the problem is that if you write JavaScript loosey-goosey and ignore things that you may not even know are issues because you don't use JSHint or a tool like JSHint, that'll bite you in the butt. You'll have thousands and thousands of lines of JavaScript and a silent error somewhere, a silent thing that's not doing what you thought it was going to do, and you get to go line by line and figure out where it is. It's not a fun time. Like, I used to do this professionally, and let me tell you, you don't want to be at work trying to debug an invisible problem in a program. You want to be at work debugging problems that you can understand, right? And a linter, like JSHint here, helps us avoid those problems. It gets JavaScript a little bit closer, not all the way, but a little bit closer to like a compiled language where we can catch problems before we run the program. All right, so other things we find. Still missing one more semicolon right there. Got it. Now look, creating global for variable. Oh, I didn't say var. If you don't say var before creating a variable, it's global. That's JavaScript for you, right? So you have to say var or let. In modern JavaScript, it's let. The body of any for or if or those sorts of things, anything that can have curly braces, you really want to use curly braces for. Because, again, weird things can happen where semicolon insertion gets you. And we have undefined variables. I'm doing for I and A. Well, what's A? This program won't work because I haven't made A yet. I almost wrote F# there, right? And we have an unused variable, I. So we can use that. And so you kind of get going and add things and add things and add things. I'm actually not sure. 18 missing. Oh. Until you don't have any more problems. So here it's also suggesting, we want to make sure A exists. There. I think that should get it. Oh no, the inside the body is what it's trying to say. Hang on. There we go, now it's happy. So you want to write until you don't have any issues with your linter. Because linter problems are problems, they're kind of more serious than compiler errors, right? A compiler error tells you exactly what's wrong. But a linter problem is a subtle problem that can be wrong And if it is wrong, you're going to have a bad day. If you follow your linter's rules and do what it says, then you can avoid those problems. It's here to help you. JSHint, just like Pt.2, in your editor of choice, look for a JSHint plugin. It's that easy. You can get the tool and run it manually on a file, but that's usually not the way people work. They get a plugin for their editor that runs it probably on save or every once in a while and updates the editor and tells you, hey, there's a problem on line X. If you're using WebStorm from IntelliJ, it has JSHint built in. The last one I wanted to show you in the linter category was Go format. That's just because it's kind of fun. Go format actually reformats files for you. You can't write invalid Go. When you run Go format, it just reindents and fixes any problems that you had, and that's all it does, because Go is non-ambiguous, like JavaScript and Python are. I'm not going to show it in action. Oh, maybe I will. Hang on. We can show it in action. Why not? Where did my... Oh, there it is. It's like, where did my terminal go? If I go to some Go code, I'll just edit this file here. Let's say that this code is non-indented. Hey, stop. So I just unindented all my code. My editor is going to run... Wow, I got choppy there. My editor is going to run Go format on save. So when I write this file, it reindents it for me. That's Go format. It always knows. It always gets it right. Look at this, 94% there. I don't know what it's doing. All right, a couple of other things. So I'm just going to take us on a quick tour of things here. I'm putting topics in here just so that you can kind of explore them. Project hosting, we're using GitHub, and there are a whole bunch of tools in GitHub that you're probably not using, but you can. Actions can automatically run your unit tests for you. They can automatically publish your software for you. I'm going to show that off at a later point. You can host simple web pages with GitHub web pages. So as long as you have a read-only web page, you can just host it on GitHub. Technically, that's how the syllabus pages are hosted. I just have a custom domain on them. If you have binaries, so the video game group using Godot, you guys might want to consider using releases to release binary versions, the exported version of your game. Right? But likewise, there are other code hosting tools out there. There's Bitbucket, there's GitLab. Those are both free hosting for Git projects and work pretty well. And in fact, there are whole other version control systems out there. So Mercurial was an early competitor to Git. It lost. I liked it, to be honest. I really liked it, to be honest. Better than Git. It has an easier interface to use. But it lost. But it's out there. You can use it. So know your tools. Know why you're using it. If you're using GitHub because it's the default tool and everybody's going to be able to see your code and people trust it, that's a good reason. If you're using GitHub for something you want to keep secret or something you don't trust Microsoft to have, maybe it's not a good reason, right? Languages. We all know that there are a lot of languages out there. Programming languages are not magic that you have to have a class to learn. I hope that you kind of realize that by now. Programming languages are a thing that you're going to have to pick up on your own. I've listed a few things here I think are useful things to look into for various reasons, right? Java, we all looked into it, but it's worth looking into specific parts of it. Look into JUnit testing. Look into how to use the Android SDK because it's the only way to write good Android apps. If you're interested in Android programming, it's happening in the fall. I don't like writing Android apps very much. I find their software development kit very obnoxious, but it's one way to do it. C#. if you do programming languages, we kind of briefly talk about C# and introduce it. But learning C# and learning how to probably especially use the web framework in it is a very good idea for your job prospects. Locally speaking, most businesses around here use .NET and C# for web projects. That's going to be your Humana, that's going to be Waystar, it's going to be Cafe Press. I think Heartland Payments or whatever they're called these days uses it. Like, it's very, very common. UPS uses it. Some of these places also use some other stuff like Java, but C# is kind of what is expected a lot of times. So it's a very good idea. And really only you can teach yourself stuff. Like, I can tell you what to learn. I can guide you through some concepts, but when it comes to learning a programming language and learning how to do things, you gotta be self-driven. So other things here, they're just a bunch of things that, hey, these are very common things that knowing at least how to write hello world or a couple of things in them is a real good idea. Same thing for databases. Usually I kind of go through all of these. If you're in database class, I will talk about a bunch of these things. But for whatever experience you might have with databases now, keep in mind it's a very large topic and it's an important underpinning to most software these days. So knowing what's out there and knowing why different databases exist is important. So like MongoDB exists as a scalable large data store. So does Cassandra. Neo4j and dgraph are super cool. They're graph databases. So you can store data interconnected as a graph. If you're in database or you take database next spring, I demo this and it's really cool. Redis is really good for caching or a bunch of those kinds of things. So that's kind of most of the tools. I want to wrap up by noting one thing out of this, what computer science majors should know, and a quickie thing out of the JOL test, right? So I'll start here. What every computer science major should know. Computer science is not a jobs training program. We teach the science of computing here. Software engineering happens to be very, very, very close to what the industry does. It's still not what the industry does necessarily, but it's close. This document is very good for kind of giving you some thoughts about what you should self-study because we cannot teach you everything, right? That's just not the way it works. If you're under that impression, I'm sorry. You are being unreasonable. But they go through things like, have a portfolio, be able to do technical communication, and what kind of technical communication. If you want to go to grad school, learn LaTeX. If you don't need to go to grad school, maybe not, right? But this is a very good document. The important things I wanted to note here, the Unix philosophy, learn it, understand it. Learning how to manipulate the file system, learning how to use Vim, learning how to run commands as scripts is an indispensable skill. It will save you time and make you look like a wizard, and that's how you make more money. Be the person that doesn't suck at their job, right? Basically what I wanted to say is this article is amazing. If you want to be the very best, like no one ever was, read this article and take it to heart and make a list of study things out of it. This guy is good and he has good advice. It's a long document, so I'm not going to go through the rest because I'm trying to wrap us up here. So the other thing, the JOL test. The JOL test is a useful thing in industry. So Joel Spolsky was a software engineer. I guess he still is. He's rather notable for some foundational ideas that kind of drive our industry today. But he has this test for your business. 12 questions, sorry. And so the JOL Quest test asks the following, and you might notice some of these things are very familiar. Do you use source control? Git. Can you make a build in one step? Remember, I asked you to be able to build your software using the command line. Can you make daily builds? Do you have automated builds? Are you tracking bugs? Do you have an issues tracker or a projects tracker, right? Do you fix bugs before you write new code? Do you have a schedule? Do you have a specification? And some of these other ones. Do programmers have quiet working conditions, and do they use the best tools money can buy, which is to say, you aren't cheaping out on things like chairs and computers and software tools? Do you have testers? Do your candidates write code? And hallway usability testing is about showing a feature to a coworker and getting their opinion on it. All right. So these 12 questions give you kind of the, is this a good idea to work for this business or not? And you want to be able to say yes to all of these questions. Now, locally, I don't expect that you will, because some of these things are not highly valued by businesses. They don't understand why. But they're all important, every last one of them. I find 8 and 9 to be extremely telling. I find 11 to be extremely telling. It's annoying to write code on an interview, but if you didn't write code on your interview and you got the job, that means nobody else did either, and you're going to be working with a bunch of idiots. You know what you don't want to have to do? Fix idiots' code all the time, right? You want to work with good, talented people so that you can make good products and get the money, right? So the Joel test is a good test, and he has, sorry, I scrolled down a lot. He suggests that if you got 10 or lower on the Joel test, if you said no to more than 2 things, you have serious issues. I would say that many local places aren't going to get a 12. They're not going to get a 10. But you want to be able to get as close to that 12 as you can. And you, the programmer, can affect these things, right? You, the programmer, as part of the programming department of some business, can institute a lot of these questions. And it's worth knowing because you have to be the change at some point. You will end up in charge at some point. So it's worth paying attention to and knowing kind of what to look for. Yeah, I get it. I have been pretty lucky in various places where I got a lot of these, but it's hard sometimes to convince an employer to do the right thing. Again, because it doesn't necessarily obviously make them money. It just prevents problems down the road because we work in a complicated field. And if you treat a complicated field slapdaisically, I don't have a word for it. If you don't take it seriously, if you skip steps, it's just like if an airline skips safety protocols. You might be able to fly a couple of planes and it works great, but at some point you're going to crash and burn, and it's going to be a problem. And I'll tell you what, especially as a programmer, the business is going to act like it was your fault. And even though they didn't support you doing, these kinds of things, they're going to act like it's your fault. Your bug tracker is email chains. Oh, God. Well, set up some software for them, show them why it's useful, and wow, they don't even track what they're doing. Oh, I'm sorry. So that's the Joel test. All right. I saw most people seem to have checked out the homework associated with this chapter. That's great. If you have any questions, if you want any more tools-related pointers and tips, ask me. I'm happy to help. A lot of these things are just kind of being in the industry long enough and knowing where to look and knowing the questions to ask to learn about them. And it's an experience problem, a long process. But it's worth your time. All right? If you guys need more time on the tools thing, if you haven't completed it yet, you can take a little more time on it. I didn't really mean it to be due today, because of the hand thing. What did I say? Did I update the canvas maybe? I know I didn't update the website. Oh, all right. Oh, speaking of tools, make sure you have a password manager and make sure it's not LastPass. For dear God, if you know all of your passwords, you're doing it wrong. Huh. Okay. Well, I'm granting an extension on tools if you need it. It's not due today. Don't worry about it, Alex. We're not. The dog bite happened, and that was that. I'm gonna set it due the 23rd. Is that cool with everybody? I'm sure it is. Let me go. Let me go edit the syllabus file. There you go. 23rd. So, Warrior, you have to visit this classroom link. It will have you accept the assignment, right? And you might have to join the classroom first, but it will have you accept the assignment, right? When you do that, you will have your own repository. You will have your own repository. I have to work a little bit to get my version of it. The template version of it. So this is the repository that you get. You are going to write in this, you're going to update this README file, and you're going to update this with text about what you think about the tools that you use, right? And then there's another thing down here. I want you to commit to this repository also proof of doing a chapter of the missing semester of your CS education. So if we go to this, I think I did this a little bit last time. This has sections on, so in the schedule here is each of the sections, various topics that you're not going to get from official computer science. I ask that you do not do one of these. Which one was it? It might have been the version control one because we're already using it. I mean, certainly not Q&A. But do one of these courses that interests you. I mean, really do all of them. But do one of these courses. You know, if you want to learn Vim, do the Vim section. If you want to learn more about debugging programs, do the debugging section. I'll click on the Vim one. They have a little lecture that you can watch, but then they have, down here, they have, if I scroll down, exercises. I want you to do some proof that you've done the exercises, or a reasonable amount of them. All right? Does that make sense? So you'll commit images. You can just add images or markdown files to this repository that you clone. So your copy of this repository that you get when you press the accept button. When you push those, that is submitting the assignment when you commit and push to it. All right. Y'all have a good afternoon. Next time we'll talk about cloud computing. See you guys later.